How's it going, everybody, and welcome to episode 298 of Master My Garden podcast. Now, this week's episode is it's not a listener's question as such, but I suppose when you're bringing out an episode of a podcast every week, sometimes inspiration in terms of what to talk about or what's topical at that time can be hard to find. And it's funny, I have resorted once or twice to putting it into ChatGPT to come up with some ideas for the podcast. And they come up with, or it comes up with 10, 10 topics. And it's funny because they're always ones that I've covered before. And I never get any inspiration from it as such. And, it can be hard to come up with topics that are new. So there's always something that's, topical to that time, but something that hasn't been covered before can be tricky and is tricky at times to come up with. And especially you know, if you're at a stage where you're at a particular time where you're just not feeling it, you're just not inspired at that time, ideas can be hard to come by. And what I find is that a lot of the time conversations or questions are what sparks the thought of creating an episode. And this week is no different. So it's two separate conversations, two different people, but both of them sort of struck me as interesting. And that's what I got to base this on. And just to set a bit of context on it, the first question was from somebody who I suppose wouldn't classify themselves as a gardener per se, but wants to do a little bit outside of their house and wants to start adding some trees and shrubs and so on. And they asked me for, some ideas or some bits of advice. They're a friend, by the way, so it wasn't a consultation or anything. It was just a conversation. And, we spoke about trees and we spoke about different shrubs and borders and all of that. And that was all right. We came up with possible plants, possible trees, and so on. And then the person said, well, it's probably too late for this year anyway. We'll leave it off until next year. And I asked why they said that. And their perception was that planting could only be done in the spring and summer. And that was the first conversation. So I thought that was interesting. Obviously, I explained to them, no, that that's not the case. But I thought that was interesting. And then the day after, or maybe 2 days after, I was talking to somebody in the gardening trade, and we were chatting, and they said um, that business had been very quiet, even though the weather, at the moment, we're still getting good dry weather, typically speaking. There's little bits of rain here and there. Temperatures are warm. There's certainly still lots of growth out there, and they said that it has been very quiet and that nobody's really planting stuff. And again, that just sinks in, and I just think about it a little bit, and it's interesting. Um, and just to put a bit of context on it, like if you went back sort of 20 years ago, certainly to my days of studying horticulture, what was always taught and promoted was that the autumn period, which typically from September through to the end of October, is the best time of the year to plant trees and shrubs. Now, obviously, you kick into bare root season towards the end of that, and that gives you another window. But in terms of planting trees and shrubs, that window of September to October was always what was the best period and is the best period. And I'll explain why in a little bit. So that is the best period for planting trees and shrubs. But I think the general perception out there, certainly with not very experienced gardeners, is that that's kind of the period where it's too late for gardening. So that's interesting. And I kind of know why that has happened. Certainly here in Ireland, there was, if you went back in time to a garden centre of 20 years ago, you would have your plant label a lot more basic than what you see now in terms of colorings and all that, but it would say on it, time of year to plant, September, October. And I know at that time that that was sort of the optimum time, and it is the optimum time. And then I guess the gardening industry would said that we're really confining our planting season to such a small window by saying this on the label. And people, garden writers, there wouldn't have been anybody doing podcasts at the time, but or YouTube at the time, but the books, the newspaper articles, the sort of radio slots, all of those were promoting September and October as the time to plant. And then, as I said, the industry felt that this was confining all this planting into a small window. So now, if you look at a label, it either doesn't say the best time to plant or it says plant all year round. So that that led to over the years, and it takes time because, people, as I said, people knew at that time that the best time to plant was, that window. And then over time, that sort of changed. And now you see it is all year round. So people know now that you can plant pretty much all year round, but they tend to do that now in spring and summer because that's when it's nice. That's when it's nice to go out and garden. That's when you perceive the start of a gardening season as springtime, and summer is your gardening season as well. But it has sort of got that autumn period has sort of got forgotten about. And it is the best time of the year. So for anyone that's listening, and I know many of you are, pretty experienced gardeners, some of you are newbie gardeners because over the last couple of months, a lot of you have got in touch saying that you're new to gardening, that you found the podcast for the first time, and how it's helping you and so on. And, no matter which category you fall into, this window that we're in at the moment, right up to the end of October and into November, is by far the best time of the year for planting trees, shrubs, and so on. And the reason being is that if you like take shrubs, for example, or trees, in the springtime, they're putting a lot of energy upwards, from away from the roots up into producing leaves and then producing flowers in some cases. And all that energy comes up through the plant and is getting pushed up to the top parts of the plant, out to the extremities of the growing tips, and pushes out the leaves, pushes out the new growth, pushes out the energy for that season. And during that time, when you pop your plant in the ground, it doesn't put as much emphasis on the plant, by its nature, is not putting much emphasis on establishment of roots, which is the most important thing, especially for anything that has sort of big growth up on top. And for that reason, this period of year is brilliant because the plant is naturally slowing down, albeit that sometimes that gets changed a little bit because they're being grown in certain conditions in greenhouses and you know being made to look good on a certain day, hitting the shelves and so on. But aside from that, the natural life cycle of most of these plants is to be slowed down at this time of the year, to be dropping leaf, to be changing from the high energy to the top to the energy being in the base. And it's at this time of the year that plants will naturally look to, I suppose, root growth and root establishment. So for that reason, it's a brilliant time of the year to plant. So if you can imagine now getting a deciduous tree, deciduous tree is one that loses its leaves in the wintertime. If you can imagine getting a deciduous tree at this time of the year, it has changed color. It has gone through its autumn color phase. In some cases, the leaves are completely dropped off at this stage. And the energy is not going upwards. It's not being forced upwards. So when you pop that in the ground, and especially when you have relatively mild conditions like you have at the moment, the plant will, over the next little period of time, now it slows down completely once we get into the real winter months. Here in Ireland, you're talking about December, January, where you might get sort of prolonged cold and wet. Um, and when you get those conditions, nothing happens. But for the next 6 or 8 weeks, there's a real chance to start to put on some root growth and establish. And as I say, obviously the bare root window is coming up, and that sort of takes advantage of that. But for containerized planting, those months of September and October have always been and will always be the best period in terms of the plant to plant. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't plant all year round, as the labels tell you now. They can, and you can, but you need to just recognize that what the plant needs at that time of the year is different. So, for example, at this time of the year, if you plant a tree, just to give that example again, there's typically going to be good moisture in the ground. Temperatures up on top are less, so we're not getting really warm temperatures. So you're not getting transpiration up on top. The plant is not sending all its energy upwards, so there's no requirement for huge amounts of water. But any water that is required is already there and in the ground. So in terms of aftercare, you don't have to do anything. If you plant that same tree, let's say in April time, so typically speaking in April time, and I know it can vary, all of the energy is going up into the plant. It's pushing out to the leaves to bust out those buds, to push out that year's growth, so right out to the growing tips. All the energy is going upwards. As those leaves open up, they all require a good level of moisture to open up, to push out, and to push out the growth and the leaf burst and all of those things. And at that time of the year, we can get a lot of drier weather. You can get periods, where it runs for 6, 8, 10 weeks with not much rain. And at that stage, you're going to have to basically give it everything that it needs to push out that growth on top. So you can plant by all means at that time of the year, and you can still very doable. But as we've said on the podcast before, you have to you have to basically tend to those quite a lot more than something that you will plant at this time of the year. So it's interesting that, as I said, the first person thought that you actually can't. It's not physically possible, or it's not the right time to plant. It absolutely is. It's the best time. And then, the person that was working in the gardening industry, and they were saying that people are just not planting at the moment, and that's not, a 2025 phenomena. That's something that has happened or has been happening for years, where people just stop sort of planting at this time of the year because mostly, especially if you're it's actually something, another conversation was like, what is gardening and what is a gardener, or what constitutes a gardener. But at the moment, people who perceive gardening, uh, they feel that it's only done in certain periods of the year. Many of us who are, you know, learning, who are either relatively good gardeners or seasoned gardeners, or are, novice gardeners who are learning all the time, we all know that there's something to be done all year round. But for somebody who is like the person that asked me the first question, they wanted to put some trees, hedges, shrubs, so on around the new house. They're first time gardeners. They haven't done it before. And I suppose that's, they're the type of people that can really find benefit from the podcast. So definitely this time of the year is a superb time to plant. Without a doubt, the best time to plant. And that's, talking about containerized stuff. If you look ahead to next month, or even in the coming weeks, we'll be looking at root ball plants, which are going to be coming out, and we're going to be looking at bare root then very, very shortly afterwards. And that's bare root, fruit bushes, hedging, trees, and all of those things. And we've covered that on the podcast, and we'll probably cover it again this year. Maybe we've covered it with different nurseries. Might get a different nursery on for this year's episode. But just to be aware that this is definitely the best time of the year to plant. It's hugely beneficial to get the plant into the ground at this stage, especially, as I said, trees. If you picture a tree going in now, with the ground temperatures being quite mild, quite warm, it's going to look to do no growth up on top, and it will definitely push out some root growth. Mightn't be a lot, but it'll be a small bit of root growth over the coming weeks, and the coming sort of 6 weeks to 2 months. And that small amount of root growth will really, really stand to it next spring. It'll get established a lot quicker. So, even you get good warm temperatures through February and March, again, the root growth will continue. The plant still won't be looking to push out leaves. And by the time it's looking to push out leaves up on top, the roots will have got somewhat established. So definitely, without a doubt, if you are thinking of planting, it's a superb time of the year to do it. So it's, in terms of the topic that I wanted to cover, it's a relatively short episode. Yeah, that conversation around what is gardening, what do you classify as gardening, that's an interesting one. It's something I might cover in the coming weeks. But what I wanted to talk to you about now is the Christmas gifts for gardeners. So cover this episode on the podcast every year. And it's interesting. There's topics or products or gifts that come up on that kind of repeat every year. But I've brought somebody different on every year to cover this, and it really is interesting. So shout out to listeners. I'm looking for two people. Last year, and I think the year before, I've had two females on. Obviously, from my point of view, I have the male perspective, but I would like to have another male listener on. So anyone who wants to come on the podcast, so it'll be video and audio will be used. So we just chat. Anyone that listens to the podcast for a while will know that it's just conversation. We have a couple of lists. We talk about what we might like. Tends to be a wish list for people as well, and you can drop hints. Last year it went out the last like the heading for the end of November. Feel that's a little bit late, so I'm going to try and get it out kind of early to mid-November this year. But what I'm looking for a female listener to the podcast who has some gift ideas for gardeners for Christmas that they would like to talk about, and a male listener to the podcast who might like to come on and share that list. The list tends to be very different from my point of view. I regularly talk about, machinery and leaf blowers and, that sort of stuff. And then the ladies tend to come on and mention things like gardening aprons, the books that they love, nice, pretty things. And yeah, it tends to be various different lists, but it's nice to have different perspective. And I suppose from my point of view, the last couple of times I've done it, I've had two female listeners on both occasions, and it would be nice to have a different male perspective rather than my own. So if you're a listener, male or female, just send me a message on Instagram, send me an email to info@mastermygarden.com, and just say that you'd like to come on. And first two people that come on, we'll do an episode together, so you can come up with a list of whatever it is, 8 or 10 products, and then we just chat and we go conversational. We talk about the pros and cons, where people might get them, so if there's favorite gifts that you like, or if there's something that you like to promote even, yeah, no problem. Talk about them. If there's somebody local to you that creating local sort of crafts or sustainable gifts, they're all brilliant ideas. So whatever that is, just let me know. So send me a message on Instagram or send me an email to info@mastermygarden.com. We'll be recording it in the next couple of weeks, and then it'll go out hopefully definitely out by the middle of November, to give people time, I suppose, to get shopping after that. In terms of anyone that's following along on the grow along, so on my grow along and the seeds that I sowed, kind of mixed results. So we definitely have had no sunshine whatsoever here in about 10 days. And that seems to be not helping the growth. Germination on about half of the seeds has been very good. And I've had no germination on some seeds, which isn't unusual too much. It can happen. Um, if I still haven't got germination in another week, I will be concerned about the quality of the seed potentially. So we'll keep an eye on that over the next week or so. But there's some of them then that will be ready for sort of pricking out and moving to the next stage. And at that point, I will do another video and show that process. If any of you are, I know some of you had lots of windowsills full of seedlings or of trays of seeds. So let me know how they're going for you. As I say, mixed germination so far. Some very strong, some not so good. But we'll keep an eye on that. But definitely we're ready nearly to move to the next stage. If you are in the same situation as me where you've sowed seed and some haven't germinated, don't worry, because as I said in that video, certain seeds can germinate sporadically, as in you might get one germinated this week and then another one mightn't germinate for 2 weeks' time. There's some of them then that are quite slow and some that are fast. And so you might look at one tray and say, oh, that's doing really well. And then you look at the tray beside it, there's nothing happening. That's normal as well. Certain varieties are very, very quick to germinate. Others are slow to germinate. Hopefully, fingers crossed, they will all come. Unless, as I say, you do have, sometimes it can happen, it might be a batch of seed that something has happened with. And Not a big thing. It does happen. Sometimes something doesn't work out, and that's the beauty of it. So we're still, as I say, it's going pretty well. A lot of germination, but certain varieties are slow, and potentially there might be something wrong there, but not to worry. The other thing to watch out for, I definitely had it this week myself. I noticed on some of the Achillea seedlings there was a little bit of a slug trail there, so I had a look under the trays, and yes, there was two culprits under there. So just got rid of those out of there. Just watch for that. That's a big thing at this time of the year because the slugs will be starting to move inwards, so they'll go into your coal frames or into your zippies or into your covered areas, trying to get a little bit of protection. And then obviously you have these nice little seedlings there as well. So just watch out for that. I'll cover all that now when I do the video anyway. So I'll do the next video and show the next stage probably in about a week or 10 days time. And yeah, that'll take us to, I suppose that'll be stage 1 and 2, and then we'll have stage 3 in the springtime. So yeah, hopefully it's all going well for you. Keep me posted. Let me know if you have any queries, and definitely shout out need to two listeners to come on the Christmas Gifts for Gardeners episode, which will be recorded in the coming weeks. So one male, one female, hopefully speaking. I'd like to get a little bit of balance there, that it's not just my male view all the time, and we get maybe some different ideas coming through. So that's been this week's episode, rather short, as I say, inspired by a question, or not a question, but a comment from somebody I was chatting to, that it's too late to plant. It's absolutely not. It's by far the best time of the year to plant. We've changed things over the years, and you can plant all year round, but the very, very best window, the one that will give you the most success, and the one that will give you the most success with the least effort from your point of view. You won't have to water, you won't have to tend to them, just plant them. If they're in the case of trees, plant them, stake them, and then forget about them, and they will grow really, really well. Root in and then be ready to go in the springtime. So yeah, definitely don't think that it's too late. It's definitely not. We'll chat about bare roots in the coming weeks. That's another important window. Other jobs at the moment, things like planting of garlic and onions. I have all my garlic and onions here, but I haven't planted any of them yet. Probably will do it in the next week or so. No real panic there either, but definitely in the coming weeks. Winter greens all doing really well. Very good growth though still. I sowed some radishes a few weeks ago. They're actually starting to bolt already in the polytunnel, which I'm a little bit surprised at. I was kind of expecting that to just sit there and I'd be able to nibble at them as the months went on, but no, they're still growing because temperatures are still quite mild. They're still growing, and I'm going to seed a little bit. But yeah, that's this week's episode. Definitely great time to plant, so don't rule it out. If you have any ideas, or you want to stick in trees or hedging, now is a great time to do that. Next week's episode is recorded. It's going to be a good one. A couple of episodes coming up on seed saving. We're definitely going to be doing something on bare root, and obviously the Christmas gifts for gardeners will be coming up in the coming weeks as well. So that's been this week's episode. Thanks for listening, and until the next time, happy gardening.